Hello YouTube, this is an Ace special, and today I'd like to talk about the possible customization we may see in the upcoming Battlefield game. For those of you who don't know, the new Battlefield game, Battlefield 1, is going to be set during the First World War. This is of course an unusual setting for a AAA game, but regardless we have been told to expect customization for both weapons and vehicles within the game. Before I delve any further, though, I want to be perfectly clear in stating that most of the examples of historical customization in improvised equipment are, as of yet, unconfirmed in Battlefield 1. First of all, though, I will start with the stuff that has been revealed in the game. First thing I should probably mention is the helmet this German soldier is wearing. This is a Gaudet helmet, and is named after its creator. These were field improvisations made in 1915 to add extra protection to the soldiers. In addition, he is using a trench club against this Entente soldier. Trench clubs were common improvised maces that were used by all sides in the Western Front in particular. A few scenes later, we see another German soldier using his spade to attack an American doughboy. This was very common during the war, as soldiers would often sharpen their entrenching tools to turn them into makeshift battle axes. Pretty much standard stuff you guys most likely knew, so we'll move on. Now this scene is probably one of my favorite scenes in the whole trailer, and I should mention that I spent a considerable amount of time looking up and double-checking the body armor this soldier was wearing. If this soldier is anything to go by, it looks like customization in this game may very well extend to body armor and other protective equipment used as well. First of all, the body armor this man is wearing is the German Armadillo type armor. These first started appearing in 1916 and were comparatively common, with over 100,000 made during the war. As far as protection goes, tests during that era concluded that armor would stop any sidearm at close range, and even the 30-06 rounds at ranges of in excess of 400 yards. But it should be mentioned that they were only protecting the front of the soldier. These typically were issued to sentries and machine gunners. Moving on to his headgear, this man is wearing a German sniper shield, aka sniper mask. This particular one was built in a factory, but soldiers in the field would often make their own as well. These were typically much tougher than most forms of body armor, as they could stop full-size rifle rounds at close range. Like the Armadillo body armor, however, it should be mentioned that the sniper shield only protected the front of the soldier. These were typically issued to snipers, although machine gunners could potentially receive them as well. About 10,000 were made. Now, moving on to the arm guards, I should mention that DICE did make a few goofs over the course of this trailer, as far as equipment is concerned. Most of it could be explained by the fact that certain weapons and equipment presented are acting as placeholders for other gear. However, I believe these arm guards are a specific accident on the part of DICE. Now, these did exist during World War I, but they were experimental armor made by the United States. I suspect a possible cause for the confusion is that some of the photos show this soldier wearing the armor with the experimental Model 5 helmet, which greatly resembles the German-style helms of the time. This particular type was lightweight armor and was meant to be given to infantry. It is known that the United States did send at least 50 of these into France, along with many different models of experimental helmets to be tested in the field. Moving on, let's talk about this scene where the planes are attacking the Dreadnought ship. The plane on the right is carrying Le Prieur rockets. These were air-to-air rockets made by the French for attacking German airships early during 1916, and came in both armored piercing and high-explosive variants. This is a German aircraft fielding them, so they may be a placeholder for a German equivalent, such as the rockets used by German fighter pilot Rudolf Nebel. So I figured I'd show these two scenes together because I will be real brief on this. You can get scopes and bayonets in this World War I game. Moving on, this scene from in front of the cockpit actually holds an interesting little tidbit. The device the pilot seems to be looking into is an Aldous sight. While bayonets and scopes on rifles should be expected in a World War I game, special gun sights on aircraft is actually pleasantly surprising. Of course, this could just be a model, but you never know. Finally, we repeatedly got to see soldiers carrying gabelladongs. These were improvised weapons in which multiple grenade heads would be fixed to a central grenade and thrown as one. These are shown on many of the soldiers, so it is likely that it is a placeholder for other grenade models. Well, that pretty much covers the customization we have so far seen, but to give you an idea of some of the very real options that DICE would have when it comes to customization for a World War I game, I feel I should go into detail about some of the various attachments, equipment, improvisations we may end up seeing in the final product. First, let's talk about attachments and improvisations that were tested or used on rifles and such. Moving on from the basic bayonet and scopes that were used during the war, one of the other modifications was the trench magazines. These were factory-produced variants of rifles such as the Gewehr 98 and the Springfield 1903 with extended magazines. The advantage here being that you could fire more shots before having to reload. These were typically used by sentries and crews aboard observation balloons. Another fairly common piece of equipment was the rifle grenade. These were typically married with special attachments at the end of the barrel to allow the rifle to fire the grenade at greater distances than could be achieved by throwing grenades. These were not very accurate at range, but I would expect to see them as they were World War I's answer to the modern grenade launchers. A third comparatively famous piece of equipment in trench warfare was the periscope. These would, on their own, allow soldiers to observe no man's land without exposing themselves. Often, soldiers would mount these onto rifles. The so-called periscope rifles were often made using improvised equipment as seen here, but they also had factory-produced versions as well, with more advanced models allowing the user to operate the bolt without exposing themselves or moving the rifle. Moving on, in special cases, soldiers would often saw down their rifles. This was done to make the rifles less bulky and easier to maneuver in trenches and tunnels. These were often used by raiders and tunnelers. I pretty much covered the more common stuff, so let's move on to more rare and experimental customization options we could see for rifles. First of all, World War I was one of the first wars to use silencers. The silencer was actually invented by legendary gun designer Hiram Maxim, the same man who invented the Maxim machine gun. The United States was a user of his silencer designs, as well as the Moore silencer design, the latter of which was not as quiet but could theoretically field a standard bayonet. These were most often issued to snipers, although machine gunners were also sometimes equipped with them, and at least on one occasion an artillery piece was as well. One of the more interesting devices of World War I was the American Peterson device. To use this, the soldier was expected to move the bolt from the Springfield 1903 or Enfield Pattern 17 and replace it with the device in question. By doing so, this experimental piece of equipment could convert the 30-06 bolt-action rifle into a magazine-fed 40-shot rifle that fired .32 caliber sidearm ammunition, and it could accomplish this in a matter of seconds. About 65,000 Peterson devices were made in all. Without a doubt, though, the rarest attachment for rifles would be the so-called flaming bayonet. These devices were made exclusively by the U.S. and were attached to the end of a barrel, below the standard bayonet. They were tiny flamethrowers with a short range, but they were also a fascinating idea from the time. Well, that was pretty much the limit when it comes to the customization for rifles, so let's move on to sidearms and improvised weapons. The sidearms are actually limited as far as customization goes, with bayonets, extended magazines, and stocks fitted being the extent. It should be noted that these features were often combined to form trench carbines, but that is about it. When it comes to improvised weapons, though, there isn't that much of a shortage. Aside from what we have seen so far, the most famous example would be the homemade grenades that the soldiers would often use. These came in a number of types, such as the hairbrush and racket grenades, but the most famous of all were the British jam tins, typically made from ration cans. Aside from grenades, other improvised weapons included nail knives, which were sometimes used by the French, and the Dudley push knife. Now, while World War I did have a lot of improvised weapons in use, I wouldn't expect certain weapons to see use in the game. For example, while soldiers did actually use catapults and ballistae to hurl grenades at the enemy, I wouldn't expect them to be in the game. I also wouldn't expect the British bayonet hat to be in the game either, due to the limited practicality of it. So going back, let's talk about body armor, which I did mention earlier in this video. The soldiers of the war could get body armor in one of three ways. They could be issued it, they or their family could buy a commercially sold set, or they could make their own. Because of this, the quality of body armor varied greatly in terms of weight, protection, and general design. As it stands, soldiers from all the major powers appear to have used body armor to some form or other. Some nations such as Italy, France, and Germany even use shields worn on the arm. It would actually be quite interesting to see this as a form of customization, trading speed for protection as such. It could even extend to the helmets, as the Germans, for example, had plate attachments for their Stahlhelm, which would typically be given to snipers. In addition, other nations, such as the United States, experimented with different helmet designs, resembling medieval knights. These designs were often meant for machine gunners. Of course, we could also see customization in the form of camouflage. This would actually historically mean especially painted helmets, painted rifles, and even camo patterns on uniform. This was even the war that saw the first ghillie suits, so we may end up seeing those as well. I think I'll finish this video by talking about potential customization options for aircraft. When it comes to aircraft, we do have a few interesting options. First of all, we could see bombs loaded onto the planes, including various sizes and types. Another thing we may see is customized main weaponry, both additional guns and perhaps switching out the standard armament for something heavier. For example, the Entente powers sometimes use large 45 caliber rifle rounds to attack balloons, while the Central Powers sometimes mounted the Becker 20mm cannon on both single-seat fighters and for gunner position on some two-seaters. Another unique weapon among aircraft at the time was the Davis gun, used by British heavy bombers. This was a recoilless 57mm cannon that was originally meant to fire on German submarines, and was typically mounted in the front gunner position. The last device I'll mention here I sadly could not find photographs of, but I was able to get a basic description of it, and that would be the Bunge aircraft flamethrower. This was a flamethrower that was placed on some Germans' two-seater planes and would be operated by the man in the gunner position. The flamethrower itself was said to be placed at the bottom of the fuselage of the plane and facing towards the rear. When the plane conducted a strafing run at low altitude, the flamethrower would leave a blazing inferno behind the aircraft. This last device was indeed tested in battle by the Germans and was used on the 371st Infantry Regiment, a segregated regiment of the U.S. Army, and it belonged to the same 93rd Division that the Harlem Hellfighters were a part of. Well, I think that about covers everything. Keep in mind, most of the stuff has not been confirmed and may or may not be in Battlefield 1. Regardless, I trust most of you will leave today feeling a bit more enlightened to the equipment and improvisations that the soldiers in the field made during that war. I hope to see you guys again soon. Until then, ace out.